Hello there, I'm Philip and you have just stumbled upon Scripted Adventures. You wanted to learn game development for a long time but didn't know where to begin? Then this channel is for you. For this Getting Started series, we will delve into the Unity game engine and learn all the basics on how to create games. In this video, we will be discovering the basics of the Unity game engine, and in 20 minutes you will have a very simple game set up and working. Installing the Unity game engine is very simple. Go to unity.com and click on Download. You can choose to download for Windows or for Mac. Also, there are instructions for Linux. The Unity Hub serves as your starting point for creating new projects or switching between installed editor versions. Select the Installed tab and Install Editor. Here you can choose any of the LTS versions, but I recommend to use the latest LTS version. LTS stands for long-term support. This guarantees a more stable experience with regular bug fixes. When you click on Install, also make sure to install the Microsoft Visual Studio Community Edition. This is your code editor where you do all the scripting and programming. Also make sure to install the Windows Build support. Okay, let's create a new project. Click on New Project and you will see a lot of different templates. There are a couple of main templates you can always use. These are the 2D and 3D Core, the 2D and 3D URP, and the 3D HDRP. Core stands for the old built-in render pipeline, which Unity replaced with the scriptable render pipelines URP and HDRP. Both have different feature sets, which we will discuss in a later video. For now, let's choose the 3D URP version. You can choose a project name. In this case, I will say Pong, and choose a location, and then click on Create Project. Okay, so here we are. As you can see, the Unity editor is split up in multiple separate windows. You can drag tabs by clicking on the tab name and holding it. Then it will split up and you can set it to any place you like. It will also dock windows you're currently dragging onto existing other windows. The editor is pretty flexible, so you can create your own layouts as you like. Also, you can remove a window by clicking on the More Options icon and choosing Close Tab. When you have the issue that you removed the tab and you can't find it anymore, then you can click on the More Options icon again and choose Add Tab. Also, some windows are not listed there, but rather under the Window menu item on the top. As you can see, there are a lot of different options here, which we will also discuss in a later video. Unity provides also a couple of different layouts already. These are located under the Layout menu item here. Let's just choose the default one. The hierarchy displays every game object in your scene. Game objects can be models like characters, buildings, or just normal cubes, but they can also be cameras, lights, and much more. You can use the hierarchy to sort, group, and order game objects. The hierarchy also uses a parent-child model, which we will discuss in a minute. For now, just right-click on the hierarchy and choose 3D Object Cube. As you can see, a cube was created in the scene view. The scene view is your main entry point to move, rotate, scale, and edit your game objects in the scene. Now, select the cube and you will see 3 arrows popping up. These arrows stand for the different axes where the cube can move. You can hold these arrows and drag the cube by just holding it and dragging it. Also, you can do it for the rotate and also for the scaling. Now, let's discuss the hierarchy again shortly. As I mentioned, the hierarchy has a child and parent model. We can test this to get a feeling for it. Create a sphere by right-clicking the hierarchy and 3D Object Sphere. Then you will see a sphere. Select your sphere and move it just slightly next to the cube. As you can see, when you select the cube, the sphere is not moving when you grab it. But if you make the cube the parent of the sphere, like this, then you will see, after you drag the cube, that the sphere is also moving. Okay, let's discuss the Unity Inspector. The inspector is your focus point if you want to change data of a selected game object. In other words, you inspect one particular game object. For example, you can click on the sphere and you will see all the components of the sphere. Changing the transform position, rotation or scale will also change it directly in the scene view. So this is an alternative way to change it if you want to have more control of the values. In order to fully develop an interactive game, we also need to write code at some point, and components are one part of that. We can create our own custom components and attach them to game objects so they behave like we wish them to. Let's try this out. In order to do that, we need to look at the project window here. Here we have all our assets, models, textures, visual effects and sound effects ready to be used in our game. Let's create a new folder and call it scripts. And in the scripts folder, again right-click, create and C# script. Let's call it player controller. As you can see, a script was created, and if we double-click on it, our code editor will open up. In my case, this is a Visual Studio Code edition because I use Visual Studio Code for all the programming, but in your case it will be the Visual Studio Community edition. Both of them are very similar, so you can just go along with it. Okay, let's go back to the Unity project and create our own custom Pong game. For this, we can remove the sphere and also the cube. Right-click in the hierarchy, 3D object and plane. If you want to move in the scene view, you can do it by using the middle mouse button and the right mouse button. The right mouse button is for rotating and the middle mouse button is for repositioning. Let's scale the plane a bit. We can do it in the inspector and choose 1.5 as a scale for the x-axis and 2 for the z-axis. Then we need a ball. Just create a 3D object and sphere and call it ball. We should position it at 0, 0, 0 and also 0.5 in the y-axis. As you can see, the plane is a bit far off. That's because the position is completely wrong and we should place it in 0, 0, 0 again. And then the ball is directly above the plane. For a real Pong game, we need some walls. Let's create a 3D object and choose cube. In this case, again, position 0, 0, 0. And this time, let's scale it up a bit. For the walls, we could use 0.5 as the x-axis scale and also 20 as the z-axis scale. Then let's move it up a bit and drag it onto the end. If you move it, you can also see where you can drag it, so it's not on the edge of the plane, but rather on the plane. Also now we want to duplicate the wall. Just click on the cube again, Command D, and then it's duplicated. And we can just hold the x-axis and move it there. Awesome, we have a wall, we have a ball, and we need a player and an enemy, of course. So create 3D object again and a cube. And this will be our player. The player will also be at the position 0, 0, 0 again. And then you can just move it to the beginning of the plane. Let's move the cube a bit up. And let's say the scale is 3. We should probably move the scale to be at 0.5 at the z-axis. Duplicate it and move it to the other side. And call it enemy. So, when you click on the Game tab, then you will see how the game will look in the game view, so what every player would see. This is mainly driven by the main camera. As you can see, it doesn't look very good and you can't see the whole plane, so we should move the camera a bit. One easy way to move it is just to place the camera as you would like to see it in the scene view, like so, for example. Click on the camera and do Ctrl-Shift-F. And when you click on the game, you will see it looks exactly like that. Let's clean it up a bit and remove the rotation. We can also clean up a bit the values for the x-axis position and also for the y position. And we should clean up the z position. Let's say -15. So the game looks a bit gray, so we should probably add some colors. In order to create colors, we create materials. So let's create a folder called material or materials. Then inside this folder, create a material. Let's call it ground for the ground plane. A material is basically a shader which changes the appearance of the game object. In order to change the color of the game object now, we can just use the base map and change the color here. For the ground plane, we should choose a black color, so it's very black and dark. And we see nothing changes on the plane. This is because we didn't assign the material to the plane. We can change the material of the plane by clicking on the plane and moving the ground material onto the existing lid material. If you have two materials, just make sure to have one because it is not working for the plane. Let's create 4 more materials for the walls, player and the ball, and also for the enemy object. Create material, call it player, and choose a green color, for example this one, and just drag it onto the cube. You can duplicate materials also by Ctrl D, and you can rename it by just clicking on the material. Call it enemy in this case and choose a red color. For the walls, we could maybe use a blue color in this case, so duplicate a material, call it wall, and choose a blue color. Drag it onto the wall, and now you have a couple of different colors. For the ball, we could use a very white one, so duplicate the color again, rename it to ball, and choose a white color and drag it onto the ball. Now all the colors are set up and it's looking good in the game. When you click on the play button here at the top, then it will change the editor to be in game mode or in play mode, better to say. As you can see, nothing is happening because we didn't program and develop anything, so no interactivity is happening. This is something we will change now. As we already have a player controller script, we can use this player controller script to control our player and move it around by clicking on the left and right arrow or maybe on the A and D key. So open Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio Community and you will see 2 methods, one start function and you will see one update function. In this case, we don't really need the start function and only need the update function. Start with one variable, which we call horizontal, which equals input get axis horizontal. So in this case, we created a variable by declaring var and also naming it horizontal. After the equals, we say what is the horizontals variable, so what is the value of that, and we use input get axis in order to get our inputs, in this case the left and right arrow. This is using the old input system and is not recommended for newer games, but in a later video we will clarify what the new input system looks like and how we can use it to develop modern games with different controllers, for example. In order to move the player now, we can change the position. Transform.position equals, or better to say plus equals, vector.right times horizontal times time delta time and also a speed variable, which we will create in a second. Let's create the speed variable by creating a float underscore speed, and don't forget the semicolon. Also in this case, because it's a private variable, we need to use serialize field. The serialize field is very important here because when we don't write anything like public, then this variable is called a private variable. A private variable cannot be changed from outside of this class, so we need to use serialize field in order to show it in the inspector and be able to change the value of this variable. So let's check how it works. We have our player game object and we move the player controller script onto the game object. You can either drag it and move it here, or you can also use the add component menu and just search for it by player controller, and then there it is. Let's choose a speed of 20 for example and go into the play mode. What you will see is that it is super fast, which is okay, but what is not okay is that it is moving through the wall. One option is to use a collider, so when it collides it stops, or the other option is to restrict the movement to a certain range of values. This is something we will do now. So stop the play mode and let's go underneath the horizontal and do an if statement. We will check if the horizontal is smaller than 0 and if the transform position x is smaller or equal than -5.5, and then we return. The same thing we can duplicate and do for the right wall just by changing the smaller to greater and also greater equals 5.5 instead. Don't forget to remove the minus. So if we go back to Unity and we check it, then you can see it stops exactly at the right position. Okay, we have our player controller, but now we also need a ball. Let's create a script and call it ball. We can assign the ball directly as a component, open the script, and in this case we should leave start and update and not remove it. We can still remove the comments here. And again, like in the player controller, we need a variable called speed. Also what we need is a rigid body. A rigid body is used for physics calculations. So let's call this variable underscore rigid body. And in the start function, we assign the rigid body by getting the component rigid body. Get component is used to get a reference to a component which is already on the game object. So in this case, it's a rigid body. What we don't have is the rigid body currently on the game object. As you can see in Unity, if we click on the ball, you can see the mesh filter, mesh renderer, sphere collider, and the ball. So create a rigid body here by add component rigid body. And in this case, we will leave the use gravity and all the default settings because they are very excellent for our use case. In the start function, we also want to shoot the ball. Delayed shoot. This is a function call, or in this case in C#, it's called also a method call. And a function call is a technique of wrapping code to perform a certain task and then maybe return a value or do some stuff. But we didn't really define what the function does, so let's define it. Say void delayed shoot. Void means we return nothing from the function. If we would, for example, do int here, then it would return an int value. An int value is something like a 1 or a 2, and we could do something like this, so we receive a value from this function. But we don't want it, we just want to return nothing and call it void. We also need another function shoot, because this is delayed shooting. We want to wait a couple of seconds and then shoot. So if the game starts, we wait, for example, 2 seconds or 1 second, and then we shoot. Do this by calling invoke and then shoot and 2. And this does exactly that. It calls the shoot function in 2 seconds. So what does the shoot function do exactly? It should change the velocity of the ball in the direction of the player or in the direction of the enemy, of course. In order to do that, we can call rigidbody.velocity equals new vector 3. So we construct a new vector and we do some randomness in here. So random.range, and let's just say minus 0.25 to 0.25. In the y-axis it shouldn't move at all, but on the z-axis it's very important that we do a sign, so it moves from -1 to 1, and we do a random range from -1 to 1. And also we need the speed to be multiplied, so we have a different speed for the ball to shoot at. The update function in this case is not needed because everything is done by the physics. So let's check if this is working as expected. Go into the play mode. And as you can see, nothing is happening. This is because if you go to the ball game object, then you will see that the speed is set to 0. We need to change that to maybe 20. So, if you can see, it is shooting, but it is super slow. Let's create a new physics material and call it bounciness or bouncy. Use a friction of 0 for both the dynamic friction and the static friction, and the bounciness should be set to 1. Also, we need a physics material for the ground. And change everything to 0 here, because we don't want the ground to be bouncy. And we need to apply also the physics materials to the different game objects. The ground gets the ground physics material, set here in the material, and all the other objects get the bouncy material. Also, don't forget to set the bouncy material also to the sphere, to the ball. And let's try it out again. As you can see, the ball is bouncing, but we have a couple of problems here. First, the enemy is not reacting, and also the game doesn't reset. So let's first change the enemy. Recreate a new script in the script folder by using create C# script and call it enemy. And we also assign the enemy script to the enemy game object. Open the enemy script. And we do nearly exactly the same like in the player controller. So we can copy the speed and the update function to the enemy. But we need to change it, of course, because we can't use the player inputs here, then the enemy would also react to our player inputs, and this is not what we want. We want the enemy to calculate its own movement. We need to calculate the distance between the ball and the enemy in the x direction, so should it move left or right? And we can call this variable distance x. And this is using the sign function because we only want to know is it right or left, so -1 or 1. And we need the ball, of course. We don't have the ball yet, so let's create a variable for that. As you can see, I use the ball script because we have the ball as a component and we can reference the ball directly by using the ball script here. Later in Unity we will need to assign this variable because it will be null by default, so it will reference nothing. But we will do it in a second. First, let's calculate the distance between the ball and the position of the enemy by using ball transform position x minus transform position x. Remove the horizontal input. And as you can see, we have the problem because the horizontal is gone and we just replace it with the distance x. And everything else stays the same. Let's go back and check if this is working. So as you can see, nothing is happening for the enemy. And we also have a null reference exception, object reference not set to an instance of an object. You can click on the console and you will see a lot of similar errors. When you click on one of the errors, it will show which game object is throwing this error. So as you can see, the enemy, and as you can see, the ball is none. So it is not set. The enemy doesn't know which ball we refer to because it could be any ball, so we should change it. Go out of the play mode and assign the ball to the enemy and change also the speed to be maybe 10 in this case, so it's a bit slower than our player. Yes, and it is working. So one thing that doesn't work yet is if the ball leaves the plane, then the game isn't reset. So we should create some function in order to check that and reset the game, of course. Do this by creating an empty game object, which is called resetGame. The position here is not relevant for this functionality, but we should clear it up to be 000 in this case. And also create a new script called resetGame or restartGame. This depends on how you want to call it. And this is a super simple function, but we use a different approach to this one. We don't use a start function and we don't use an update function. What we will use is a trigger. So in Unity, one of the main ways in order to check if something happened is a trigger. A trigger is something like a collider. So as you have seen, a wall is a collider where something can bounce back or react in physics. A trigger is exactly that, a collider which doesn't collide, but when something moves inside the collider, then it triggers or triggers something. What we want here is, in this case, if the ball moves out of the trigger, then we want to trigger a function, in this case restart the game. So we need something like a collider. So create a box collider. And you have this green cube here. And we can increase the size of the cube to be, for example, 15. So it spans the size in X of the plane and also in the Z-axis. Let's do 20. So it's exactly the same size, and move it up a bit like 0.5 on the Y-axis. In order to make the collider a trigger, use isTrigger, and then it is a trigger. Move the resetGame script to the resetGame game object, and let's create a new function which is called onTriggerExit. So if something exits this trigger, then we should do something. In order to react to it now, we can use an event. So do using Unity engine.events. So doing this will make it easier for us to write the Unity event, because if we didn't do that, we need to write Unity engine.events.Unity event and call it, for example, on restart. But with the using statement, we don't need to use the first two statements and just remove it, and it works, as you can see. Make the variable onRestart public, so we can see it also in the inspector. And in the onTriggerExit, call onRestart.invoke. OnTriggerExit, if something leaves the trigger, then the event onRestart will be called and something will happen. What will happen depends on what we set in the inspector of this event. So go back into Unity and you will see in the reset game object on the restart or reset game script this onRestart event. And in this list we can say, for example, that the ball should be reset. So click on the plus sign, move the ball onto the object here and check if the ball has something called reset game or reset ball, for example, and it doesn't have this function. This is because we didn't program this function yet and we should do it now. So let's go to the ball script and do void reset ball. In this case, the position of the ball should be set to transform position equals vector.0, and also the rigid body velocities should be reset. Do the delayed shooting again, so we reset everything, we wait 2 seconds, and then we shoot again. We have nothing declared as a visibility. For example, if you don't set this explicitly as public, then you will not see it in the event menu, because if you leave it out, then it's implicitly called as a private function. So make it public. But now if we want to assign it, like go to the ball and then reset ball, then you can click on it and the event is already set up for us. So what we did is now, if the ball leaves the trigger, then the reset ball function will be called. The ball will be set to the transform position 0, the rigid body velocity will be reset, and also the delayed shooting will be invoked. So let's try it out. Yeah, and here we are. So, and that's actually already it. If you want to build the game, then you can just go onto the file menu, build settings and build. And then you can choose one folder. For example, you can create a build folder. And this will create your game project. And if you run this project, you will see the whole game as we've just developed. As you don't really have a menu to close this game, you need to probably close it with Alt F4, so yeah, just exit it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks again and see you in the next video.